should have used my bread knife, it appears. Welcome to cooking cheap, easy, and tasty meals. Today I'm going to make some sun-dried tomato and Parmesan bread. Now I'm going to start with 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. I'll try not to spill any more than I have to. Now there's several ways you could get flour. One way is to spoon it in here, one way is to scoop it. I usually scoop it and scrape the top. You can also do it by weight, but I'm not doing this one by weight, I'm doing it just by measure. 2½ cups of all-purpose flour. Next, we're going to want 1 cup of whole wheat flour. So here we have whole wheat flour, and I'm going to do the same thing. I'm going to scoop a cup. I'm going to make sure it's smooth down. I'm not going to compress it. I'm just going to shake it off, and there's 1 cup of whole wheat flour. And before I do anything else, I'm going to whisk all this together and kind of get the flour mixed together before I add any of the other ingredients. Kind of aerate the flour and break down any lumps there might be, although I don't think there are any lumps of any significance in it. But get the whole wheat and the white flour mixed together. Okay, that looks pretty good. Now, since this is going to be a no-knead bread, I'm going to add 1/2 teaspoon of yeast and 1 teaspoon of salt. Salt makes a difference in bread. Without the salt, you don't have much flavor. Even though I don't think it's truly necessary, I'm also going to add 1 teaspoon of sugar, although I think the yeast will probably find enough food in the flour. I'm just going to add that just to get it started. Again, I'm going to mix these together. Now we're not going to add any of the other ingredients at this point except for the water. We will add the sun-dried tomatoes and the Parmesan once the dough has risen. All right, now we want 1½ cups of water. We're going to let this rise overnight. We're just going to take water right out of the tap. 1 and 1/2 cups. It's possible you'll have to add some additional flour to it. It's possible you'll have to add some additional water, but this should be a good starting point. So all we're going to do is get the flour moistened. We'll end up with a rather shaggy dough, and we're going to let that sit overnight. And it will rise, and then we'll go to the next steps. But we're not going to do much in the way of kneading, if any. It's a no-knead bread, but we may do some folding just to help build the gluten. But I think it's going to be pretty sufficient just doing this. Turning all the flour up and down. I'm going to take my hands and finish it. So turn it over, make sure that the moisture is spread out so that it'll pick up all the flour. Fair amount of moisture in this, so I'm not concerned that it doesn't have enough, but it's still got to be distributed such that the flour all gets wet. If it doesn't, we'll have to add a little bit more water to this, but I don't think we're going to need it. It feels really nice and moist. All I'm doing now is mixing it, trying to get the flour and the water well mixed. Still a little shaggier than I'd like. I still feel some flour. I still see some flour that's not gotten in there, but that looks pretty good. So what we're going to do is we're going to let that sit for about 12 hours. It's about 9 o'clock, so somewhere between 9 o'clock tomorrow and sometime after that, depending on how it rises, we'll go to the next step. But we'll take a look at it about 9 to see if it's ready to go to the next step. Should double at least in volume during that period. There we have it. Step 1 on our no-knead bread. Now the interesting thing about this is the base dough. To this we're going to add the ingredients to make it a sun-dried tomato and Parmesan bread. You could also add roasted garlic. You could add a number of other different ingredients and use the same base dough for different breads. So this is a good starting point bread. It's a mixture of whole wheat and regular all-purpose flour. You could use bread flour instead if you'd prefer, but I think it'll have enough gluten content to make it a good sturdy bread. Okay, it's been about 12 hours and it's about doubled in size. So all I'm going to do at this point is pull it a little bit on top of itself, just to give it a chance to build some more gluten. Just turn it. I'm pulling it. I'm going to use my hands, pull it a little further. All that's going to do is strengthen the dough a little bit. Just to be sure, I'm going to give it a little bit more time and let it rise a little further. So now we're going to add our tomato and our Parmesan to our dough. So first thing we got to do is take the sun-dried tomatoes and chop them up. I'm not really concerned about how big the pieces are. They're going to cook into the bread, but I'd like them to be smaller than just the full tomato size. So I'm just rough chopping them. Okay. Now, the next thing we're going to do, we're going to take our dough, and we're going to put a little flour out on the bench. We'll spread it out a little bit. This straight again. And I'm going to take this and pull this dough out. It's still a little sticky, which I would not surprised at. So I'm going to turn it over in the flour a little bit. Get it a little coated with flour so it'll be a little less sticky. And I'm going to spread this out with my hands. You could roll it if you want. I'm just going to spread it out a little bit. And I'm going to take my Parmesan cheese. I'm going to just spread it around. This is about half a cup of grated Parmesan. You could use whole pieces of Parmesan, but I think I want the flavor to be spread out in the dough a little more. So I'm going to spread it out like this. And then we're going to take our tomatoes and spread them around. Just try and get them all over the dough. Then I'm going to take this and roll it into it. I'm going to spread it out a little bit, moving that around so it's in the, going to be inside the dough. Now I'm going to make a loaf of it. Got a loaf pan. I'm going to spray with a little oil. I'm going to put a piece of parchment paper in it. Put a little piece of parchment paper in the center. And I'm going to drop this loaf in here. And then I'm going to push it until it fills up the whole container. Now, I'm going to take my leftover plastic wrap and cover this, and I'm going to let it rise for several hours. Okay, the bread's been rising for about 2 hours, and it appears to have risen just right, although I let the paper stick to it, which I wish I hadn't done, but the parchment paper did stick to it a little bit, but that'll be all right. Now, I'm going to cut in the top, and I'm put it in a 450-degree oven for 25 minutes. We may have to put some foil on top of it to keep it from burning, but we're going to start at 425 for 25 minutes. Okay, I'm going to get the loaf of bread out now. Check it to see if it's done. Right around 200 degrees internally, which should mean it is done. So we're going to let it cool for a while, and then I'm going to dump it out and let it, after it cools, we can test it out. Let's see. Move this hot pan over here. And then we'll give that a little time to cool, and then we'll test it. We'll try it out and see what it's like. Okay, let's cut a slice. Got a nice crispy crust. So it has tomato, smells of tomato and Parmesan. Looks good. A couple things I would suggest is make sure that all the tomato is deeper in, because if it's on the outside, it's going to burn. That's one thing I learned in this process. I don't think I've ever used this kind of, in fact, I'm sure I haven't used this kind of sun-dried tomato. These are moist in oil, and I maybe should have used a little drier version. But from a flavor perspective, look at the bread. It's got a nice crumb. It's got plenty of substance to it, and let's see what it tastes like. It tastes like bread with sun-dried tomatoes and Parmesan in it. Another thing that might be an improvement would be to use cubes of Parmesan instead of grated Parmesan, so that it would be chunky. I don't know if that'd make that much difference. Bread is really very good. It's a nice bread with plenty of tomatoes in it. Got a nice crisp crunch on the crust. The tomato is sweet. The bread has a nice crumb. It's moist. Tastes pretty good. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe and give us a like. Thank you.